Welcome, everybody, to Power at the Podcast. With me today, I have Drew Mayer Oaks, El Paso's film commissioner, and he works with Destination El Paso. Drew, I've known him for about a year and a half now, since he came in from San Antonio. And we're very lucky to have him, as he's lucky to be here as well in El Paso. For a long time, I think one of the things that it was my experience in film, the past 20 years, having won the first award in filmmaking in UTEP back in 1996. And luckily, I had a wonderful professor named Cynthia Farah, who was a Stanford student and worked with Otto Preminger. And she was really the person that instilled in me the confidence and opened up the corridors to see exactly what the film industry has to offer. I knew I wanted to tell stories. I knew I had something to say. I knew I had a vision, but I just did not have the facilitation, or that I did not have the resources. I didn't just, was, deaf, dumb, and blind, so to speak, until that, that veil was lifted, and that was based off of a certain level of education and the right person. So I was lucky enough to work on a bunch of union films that were here prior to New Mexico having their tax incentive implemented and all the work going over there. So I worked on a film out in Fabens called what was it called? Coyote Rain, and then it became I forgot the second name, but it was Coyote Rain. And that was about a $5 million show. And I saw what the industry was. I saw rigs coming in. I saw union workers. I saw actors. I saw producers. And I was getting hotels for all of them. So I was privy enough to work on that film and then multiple other films, including Traffic. So having seen El Paso's growth or stagnation in some cases with regards to film, one of the things that I thought was necessary for there to be a viable industry here in our region was leadership and the role that a film commissioner can play in galvanizing and creating palpable and real industry is everything. And so that being said, I want Drew to talk a little bit about what brought you to El Paso, how long have you been here, and what's the deal? What's going on? What are we going to do?
Thanks for having me. I've got a little bit of a cold today, so I can't speak as loudly and forcefully as you. You have a great radio voice.
Thank you. It's a preacher.
Yeah. Well, I started my career with the Texas Film Commission back in 1991, so I've been working in film commissions for a long time, and they've changed quite a bit. And you kind of alluded to one of the biggest changes in our industry, which is tax credits. It's completely changed the way film commissions operate. The film commissions in tax incentivized regions work differently than traditional film commissions, or what I call traditional film commissions, and the way that I learned to be a film commissioner. So coming to El Paso is something that I am very excited about, because we have an opportunity to bring together a community of creative individuals and to promote the kind of the art and craft of filmmaking without being dependent on this kind of below-the-line, factory-driven culture of incentivized filmmaking. Now, I think filmmaking has benefited greatly from incentives in the United States, and Canada, of course, was one of the earliest leaders in the incentive race. The industry thrives on finance instead of content these days. Although, we'll talk about different models, and of course, Netflix is the most prevalent new model, followed by Disney Plus and NBC Peacock, and what's the other big one that just hit the ground? Anyway, there are a lot of those that are changing the model. And we'll see how that susses out in the next 5 to 10 years. But I think El Paso has an opportunity to highlight our creators, and not just our worker bees, people that are working for hire on projects that come in and then leave the city.
Yeah, I completely agree, Drew. I think that's one of the things that we were talking earlier, and that was not having to wait for change to come from the top down, and I think the value that, New Mexico offers with the film incentives is absolutely brilliant. Anything that creates some kind of work, and especially in a place, like New Mexico, that's a beautiful state, and it just needs more people there, and I think film has done tremendous for Albuquerque and Santa Fe and New Mexico as a whole. But it is, as you said, just dependent more on creating factory work kind of scenarios that are necessary, but you have to figure out what El Paso's value proposition is, and it is innovation. It is finding ways to be entrepreneurial. It is the fact that there's for me, I see it as 3 million people in this area. And it's a approximation, obviously, with Juarez and El Paso, but within that, you have this entrepreneurial spirit of sort of being isolated, throughout, from 2 countries and 3 states. El Paso and Juarez has been its own kind of ecosystem, its own atmosphere, for better and worse. And what we're talking about is how to not just create, utility, but how to create, utility with creativity and connecting platforms of networking that could ultimately lead to some, monetization of it and creating self-sustainability. And I think I appreciate that you fully see that, because that's important.
Yeah, and the future of the city is going to rely on a variety of industries. Obviously, we've seen changes in the industry in the city over the decades, but creative industries are, in general, higher margin industries. They are benefits to tourism, so they have a variety of additional benefits other than just increasing your tax base and putting people to work. People want to come to a creative destination for vacations, for meetings, and for other visiting. So music, film and TV, photography, design, audio recording, they're all things that the city has that we have to exploit, and we have to promote it, and we have to make sure people know about it, and we have to support it from within, because our entrepreneurs in the creative industries are going to continue to do their work, and we want to support them and talk about them so that others can come and visit us. And I found your film is now called Sworn Enemies, and it has a high rating on IMDb.
What film is that?
Coyote Run.
Okay. Oh, really? Yeah. Wow. What year was that?
96.
No, it was On the Border, Coyote Rain.
Oh, okay.
On the Border, 1995, 96, 97. And it was written by, Josh Olson, who, that was his first film, and he ended up writing, getting an Academy for writing A History of Violence in 2006 with Viggo Mortensen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, El Paso traditionally has had a good business from Hollywood up until the mid 2000s. There would be large feature films here every 12 to 18 months.
Wow.
And that's kind of unique for the state. But it's primarily because of the terrain and the hospitality. I mean, filmmakers, if you look at the filmography about the city, you'll notice people keep coming back. In fact, Ridley Scott loves El Paso. He's done 2 projects here and stops by every few years to say hello. So there is a history of filmmaking, and of course, and we talked about earlier today, The Getaway, which was a very instrumental film in Texas film history, which was shot in 1970 in San Marcos and San Antonio and El Paso. So there's a history. We just don't have the luxury of having a huge state tax incentive like New Mexico has to do the work for us, unfortunately. So we're going to have to be smart and figure it out on our own.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that what we do here at Power at the Pass has always been finding ways to have content creation be a mechanism. My background, so part of my background was in television, so I was working at Univision and doing what's called VNG, video news gathering, and so by default, my impulsiveness and how I post on our social media is not a preference, man. It's more like a twitch of my nervous system. But I think with that, you're able to create a narrative. And part of one of the ideas that I had, Drew, and I think I've stayed steadfast and focused on that even indirectly, has been to leverage the geopolitical positioning of El Paso and Juarez for information, and not just for the obvious thing that people come and do films about here, documentaries, and that's the nautical impact, the drug wars, and all that kind of stuff. I mean more so in a best case scenario for what I've envisioned throughout the past 3 years doing Power at the Pass has been working possibly with Viceland, BuzzFeed, creating some outsourced content creation mechanism of research, almost like the way universities have ethnography, for anthropology, where you create archive systems, and as many times as I can, I'll go with the camera around town or whoever I'm with, some of my colleagues that have certain equipment, and we'll go to different neighborhoods and just shoot, just film. Like, it's much like Google is, but Google does it like nobody can, but ours is more for the perspective of cinematography, the perspective of appreciation, more of an aesthetic awareness and attunement to it. And so ideally the best case scenario would be to shoot the entire city like that. And even a few friends of mine in Juarez, why not just have them go around neighborhoods and these areas that we pass by while we're on the freeway, right? I-10 or the border highway, and we'd look over and like, oh, wow, look at that neighborhood. I wonder how it is to have a life there. Imagine just having a database and a system where we create the content and you can leverage that, much in the same way that companies do in Los Angeles, where all this stock footage that filmmakers buy to fill their content, it's shot by somebody. They're filmed by professionals. And I think El Paso, I think that would be one of the ways that we can create, an industry that is not based on narrative Hollywood studio films, but rather a pragmatic approach to having a camera and amalgamation of information.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to our desire to tell our own story and to not rely on others to tell the story for us of who we are. And especially after August 3rd of last year, we've seen really acute examples of how some people have told our story properly but also about others who have completely misrepresented who we are and how we behave.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I appreciate and what you're thinking and what you're doing is, which is why I think it's paramount that let there be more. Let there be more festivals. Let there be more celebrations. Let everybody that's doing what they're doing, do it with a little more fervor. And before, my modus operandi was territorial, right? Like, oh man, I'm gonna come at this first. Somebody's doing this, I'm gonna do it better. It's sort of like it's human nature, but I think it's a little compounded here in El Paso and Juarez, where it's a little too competitive. But I think it's balancing out a little bit more now, and I think part of what we've done here with the incubator, so to speak, is people that now have their own galleries and doing their own thing. Instead of me trying to just anchor it down with power, I'll reach out and create content and tell a story, and I think there's there's more power in the ether that isn't just anchored by the brick and mortar of locations, and I think that's in the human network situation, and I think that's the next phase of success in terms of media and content creation, and how we build a viable, real industry off of storytelling, and at least that's my focus, and I think that's one of the reasons why I like working with you. I like your approach, and I think we could create some media fests where you put El Paso on the map in a different way, and I think it's that time. I think it's beckoning. I think it's right in front of us.
Well, and we're seeing that already with the El Paso Film Fest, the Plaza Classic Film Festival, which is, I think, one of the most respected classic film events in the country, on the continent, and El Paso Media Fest as well.
Yeah, there's three of them, right? EP Media Fest, El Paso Fest, and then
they don't
Plaza.
they don't all have to be South by Southwest.
Exactly.
I think that's what people get caught up in. They'll read about South by and they'll see it and they'll think, well, we've got to have that. It's like, well, we don't have to have that. We can have multiple smaller events. And the thing that's interesting too about what you're saying is that the collaborative nature of this industry, of film specifically and storytelling, the tradition of collaboration works to our advantage, and that's I think we have to remember that in order to succeed, we will have to collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the the things that I've learned. I've continued to grow in that respect is how do you collaborate and work with people that are trying to do the same thing, really, and I think that's when you build sustainability and a healthier sort of environment to be in. It doesn't have to be so adversarial. It doesn't have to be so, not everyone is an island, and I'm not saying that out of analysis. I'm saying that probably out of projection, right? And so, but at least with that, there's a sort of catharsis and a sort of growth and transcendence, and that's what I appreciate about what's going on here. What do you think about West Texas? I have you on the on the record. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I read your short script, and I'm enticed by its subject matter and also the cast, and I think it's cool to combine music and film and in this way, and poetry, which the songs that you've created for the script. So it's kind of like a miniature version of how we envision this collaboration to work. You've got music, you may have photography, you've got poetry, and then traditional filmmaking as well. So, the tools that we use in this industry are all common, and they're the common denominator. And I think filmmaking has moved into a completely different place, and we want to make sure that we're not just being below the line, incentive driven for traditional projects. We want to help promote the creators that are creating the new media, the new ways of doing it. Who would have thought 10 years ago that you would watch an entire series of 22 episodes of a television show in 2 nights?
Right.
The
binging.
Yeah, and love it, and who would imagine that model could work, the subscription model. But it does. I was looking at, I have a Blu-ray player from about 8 years ago, and it has Blockbuster video app on it. And so they definitely came in too late. But it under the Netflix section, it says, hey, we don't just send DVDs anymore. You can see our movies on your computer. So those are the people that I think El Paso has a history of innovators, and we just want to support them to our benefit, and we'll see what the future holds.
Awesome. on that point, we'll wrap up our Power at the Podcast episode here with Drew Mayer Oaks, El Paso's film commissioner. I love it. I love that I was actually able to get the conversation going regarding film, and that's been my lifelong passion, my lifelong pursuit, and my muse, and the fact that there can, that there's a shift happening in El Paso and in Juarez, and in a cosmic alignment to be nebulous about it is exciting for me, and I'm glad you're here, Drew. I'm glad you chose El Paso. I'm glad that you have the vision that you have, and I think you're gonna hit out of the ballpark.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I've made films. I'm not a fantastic filmmaker, but I've been in the trenches, and I think that's important for someone who is going to be talking about moving this plan forward. And I've done corporate production, I've done commercials, and I've done narratives. So I know all the different ways you can have an impact in this industry. And I'm looking forward to seeing what El Paso brings to the table.
Awesome.